Hey everyone, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. We're going to jump right into this one. This is the GameSir T4 Mini controller, and the company reached out to me and asked me to do a review of their controller. And if you know anything about me, I cannot turn away a good controller. So we're going to test this one out and see how it works. Now, I'm a pretty big fan of the GameSir X2, which is a telescopic controller that works with cell phones. And so based on the merits of that controller alone, I decided to try this one out. Not a lot going on with the box here. It charges with USB-C and it comes with a brief instruction manual. And it looks basically just like a mini modern controller. It feels a lot like it too. For example, with the buttons themselves, they feel a lot like Xbox buttons. And the buttons have a transparent look to them, and I think that's because they light up. We'll try that here in a minute. I will mention that the button layout is more Nintendo Switch style than Xbox style. And so A, B, and XY are swapped if you're used to the controls on an Xbox. And like I mentioned, it just feels like a mini controller, like it's just got less space for your fingers at the bottom. Let's talk about the D-pad for a second. So this is a rubber membrane D-pad here, very reminiscent of some old school D-pads. The D-pad itself has a rubbery, grippy texture to it, and it does feel pretty good, but all the same, your fingers don't slide very naturally across the D-pad. They just get a little bit stuck when you're using it, which will be great for like platform games, but not so great with fighting games. As far as the analog sticks, they feel exactly like Xbox analog sticks, and they do click down L3 and R3. Up top, you have Start Select, Home, Screen Capture, and Turbo buttons. Now let's try out these triggers, and moment of truth here, they are digital. So they don't use an analog input, this is just on or off. The shoulder buttons are fine, they're nice and responsive, and they are easy to push across the entire button, so no problems there. Overall, I don't mind the triggers, but it is going to limit your gameplay experience if you're planning on using this on a PC. But for something like Nintendo Switch or classic games, no problem there. Yeah, overall, it's actually a pretty comfortable controller to hold. On the back here, you see not a lot going on. I wish that some of these controllers would actually show the labels of what button to push to turn on certain systems, but there's nothing here. It does say that the battery is 800 milliamp hours. As far as the plastic itself, it's a little bit grippy, and I like the fact that it's transparent. I love transparent things, so this is kind of cool to me. But the texture itself feels pretty good, not too cheap. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's how the device feels. In terms of size, it's almost exactly the size of 2 sticks of Kerrygold pure Irish butter. So if you've ever tried to use some butter to play games, you're going to know exactly what this feels like. Now, for some strange reason, you're not a huge fan of butter, then let's try something else to compare the size against. And I think an Xbox Series controller is going to be a good comparison. Surprisingly, the spacing and the size of the analog sticks and the buttons are almost exactly like the Xbox Series controller. As you can see here, if I put analog to analog, they're almost the exact same distance apart. And on top of that, when you put them kind of side by side, you can see that the buttons themselves too are equally sized and distanced. On top of that, the D-pad is about the same space. It's almost like they took the direct design of an Xbox controller and then just shrunk down the stuff around it. Okay, let's set some mood lighting and we'll test out some of these lights. And as you can see here, just starting it up, there is some blue that's around the analog sticks, and then each of the individual face buttons have their own color too. I think it looks pretty nice. So now let's try it in full dark conditions. And this is pretty good too. It's also a little bit bright, so if you're going to be playing in the dark, this might be a little bit distracting. Personally, I kind of like it, but you may not. Okay, I don't want you getting scared, so let's go ahead and turn the lights back on, and let's actually try testing this with some devices. First things first, let's pair it with some Android phones. We're going to hold down the X button and then press the home button to start the connection. And just hold it for a few seconds, and then it's going to start blinking on the right side of the device. And just like that, you can then pair it to your phone. And I was able to connect first try, no problems here. And so let's test out some emulation here. We're going to start with Virtual Tennis on the PSP emulator called PPSSPP. As you can see here, it's controlling really well. Both the D-pad and the analog stick are working out of the box. And this is kind of a cool use case. You know, it's such a small and compact controller, it's easy to take around with you and play with your phone. And despite being very compact, it's actually very comfortable to use. Okay, let's try it out with some platforming games. We'll start with Mario World running on RetroArch. And it's running really well. This D-pad actually is pretty good with platformers. As far as input lag, you know, this is a Bluetooth connection, and I am detecting a little bit of input lag, but overall it's not too bad. One thing I am noticing as I'm playing it is that this controller, despite being small, is pretty thick. Like, it's not something I was expecting, but it does kind of feel a little bit like holding a burrito. This thing has got some heft to it. It's not a heavy controller by any means, it's actually pretty light, but all the same, it does take a little bit of getting used to the fact that it's so thick when you're holding it between your fingers. And I'm not sure if this was done on purpose, but I don't find it any more ergonomic than something that wouldn't be as thick. Anyway, overall when it comes to Android gameplay, this seems to be working really well. By the way, I'm running a Google Pixel 3 right here with a Snapdragon 845 processor, and this device can play most GameCube games pretty well. Okay, let's switch it up literally with a different platform. Here's the Nintendo Switch. Now to pair this one, you hold down the top button when you're in this Switch pairing menu. And it'll take a minute, but it'll recognize the controller and then just hit L and R and off you go. Now when it comes to supported devices, I would actually argue that the Switch is probably the most compatible device with this controller. In addition to having the screenshot and home buttons that are compatible with the Nintendo Switch, it has the ability to use gyroscopic controls, and on top of that, once you've paired the device to the controller, you can use the home button to actually start up the game from standby. Speaking of other features, let's try out some of these different color options. So let's dim the lights down a little bit more, and what you want to do is hold down the turbo button and then click the L3 button. That's going to cycle through your various color options. Now on top of that, you can hold down the turbo button and then double click the L3 button, and that's actually going to cycle through various different color schemes. And so for example, you can have a pulsing rainbow light, or you can use this pulse display to cycle through the colors too. Overall, I think this cycling through the colors one is my favorite right now. Now unfortunately, when it comes to Bluetooth, this can only pair wirelessly with iPhone, Android, and the Switch. If you want to play PC games, you have to actually plug it in physically. But once you have it plugged in, it actually works really well. No need to do any additional pairing. So here I am running a Steam game called Hades, and it's working really well. And one of the nice things about it being wired like this is there's no input delay at all. It feels really nice. So overall, if you're looking for a compact PC controller, this might be a pretty good option. Now that being said, at a retail price of $30 to $35, you definitely have other options available, but in terms of a nice light-up one like this, it's a pretty good price. Now in addition to Windows PC gaming, this does work on Linux boxes running Emulec as well as Batocera. And just like with Windows PC, there's no additional pairing. All you have to do is plug it in and it's going to work out just fine. And much like with Windows gaming, this runs really well. There's no input delay and it feels really good. So again, if you have a retro game setup and you're going to be playing it, say, on your desk or something, somewhere you're not going to really mind having a cord, then this might be a good option. And I think if you pair that with the wireless capabilities of the Switch as well as an Android phone or even your iPhone, I think that's a pretty good value all told. Okay, let's talk a little bit about competition. I think in this condensed handheld space, this SN30 Pro from 8BitDo is probably going to be your best comparison. Now this controller has a little bit of a different approach. This is basically a Super Nintendo controller with some extra buttons and some PS4 style analog sticks. And this one costs about $10 more. This is $40 to $45, and you can usually find it on Amazon. But it has really nice build quality, and it feels really good, especially for classic games. Now this GameSir T4 Mini is a different story. This is basically a condensed Xbox controller. So I think if you're going to play modern controllers, I would prefer the T4, but if I'm going to focus solely on retro gaming, I think I'd like the SN30 Pro better. Okay, in terms of weight, this is 155 grams. That's pretty lightweight. It's actually about half the weight of an Xbox Series controller. But compared to the 8BitDo controller, it's actually a little bit heavier. So I think when it comes to comparison to an Xbox or PS4 controller, yeah, it's a lot lighter. But if you really want ultra portability, I think the 8BitDo is quite a bit lighter and smaller. But in the end, do I recommend this controller for the price? And really it's going to depend on you. If you want something compact, then sure, maybe that'll work out pretty well. But I would say if you have anything beyond medium-sized hands, you're probably not going to want this controller. Although it's a pretty sleek-looking controller, and I do like the RGB coloring going on here, it's nowhere near as comfortable as something like a true Xbox controller. All the same, if you're looking for something that's a little bit portable, this might be something worth checking out. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Happy gaming.